I feel more at home on stage. I feel like that's less of a performance in some ways for me than the performance of everyday life that is being autistic and masking. The stage has always felt like a place where I get to expand and be more myself. Like the stage is a place where just more is permissible.
You're listening to Artistry with Heart, a musician's wellness podcast. I'm Stephanie Lynn Bernards. We're here today with Katie Jacobson, a vocalist, songwriter, and interdisciplinary artist who uses humor and visual narratives in her musical performances to create immersive experiences for her audience. She has also written and performed her own music in a wide variety of music ensembles since 2013. In addition to her musical work, Katie has been developing a practice she calls relationship research and development, as well as a related tool called care pedagogy. Relationship research and development is a simple idea that our relationships are best served in the same way other complex tasks in life are served, with research, practice, and the creation of tools and systems. Katie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
I'm so honored to have you with me today. It has been so long, and it's just so fun to see your face.
Likewise.
You're such a beautiful and important spirit in the musical world, and when I hear you sing and play, I feel this warm balm that permeates your audiences. Your deep understanding of the human connection makes your writing and performing so relatable and deep. I've always had so much respect for your artistry and musicianship. And I know I just gave this whole intro, but why don't we start out with having you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Totally. I'm a singer primarily. I also play piano, write songs. I have a background in jazz. I also devise theater, most often with musicians as the main players.
Tell me a little bit about your earlier years. I know you're originally from Seattle, Washington, and you mentioned that's like where you cut your teeth as an improviser at like this weekly free jazz jam session. But what was it like being a young child, and how did music come into your life? How did it become what it is today for you?
Yeah, my earliest music memories are just like bits and pieces. I remember having the Aladdin soundtrack on a tape I just like wore out listening to. I'm pretty sure I was just like shedding a whole new world, but I just didn't know what I was doing at the time. I also used to tape myself just telling stories like for hours. I created this little theater production with my brother. I'm pretty sure I forced him into this whole process with me, but we made our own sets and characters, and we created our own soundtrack on tape also using like pots and pans. And then also I think reading was like a really, really big part of my childhood and kind of my gateway into music, strangely enough. I've always felt like the two are interrelated. And then as I was in school, I just got a lot of praise for my singing, which I think like as a young kid, you're like, oh, I'll just keep doing this because it feels nice. So that happened in a lot of different ways. And I think especially as someone that didn't always fit in other ways, it was nice to feel like I fit in those moments where people recognized me for this thing they thought I was good at.
Mm-hmm.
And then in high school and college, I studied jazz, was in the jazz bands. It wasn't a great experience. It was really stressful, but I had a really great private teacher and mentor named Michael Stegner, who not only like encouraged me, gave me tons of opportunities to play, but also modeled for me an alternate lifestyle, like the professional musician lifestyle, like what it really looks like. And I think that was important because I was already sensing that I was not going to take a traditional route, maybe with work and with the things I was going to do. So I think it was important to see what that could look like in someone I really respected. I quit music school my sophomore year. I was like, I'm out of here, forget this. And I studied philosophy and world religions, and I'm really glad I did. But then after school, I got asked to sing for a wedding band, and I wanted to make some extra cash. And I realized, oh, being a professional musician is actually pretty chill compared to music school. So I decided not to go to grad school. I stayed in Seattle, actually moved into a house with my now husband, Ivan Arteaga, and 3 other musicians. And Ivan and these folks were a part of this Racer Sessions that was like a free jazz community. They had a weekly jazz jam session, which we called Jazz Church, that happened on Sundays. And they
I
just
love
kind
that
of opened me
title.
up to, I know, it's really, and it really was like that. It's like you go there, you say hello to all these people you haven't seen for a while. And yeah, and then they kind of opened me up to the whole world of like avant-garde music making and kind of went from there. So
I love that music found you, even though you didn't decide to pursue it in college. I think our destinies always find us, and you
yeah.
knew music was always going to be a part of your life, and you also knew that this traditional route might not be right for you. How did you come to that decision to change majors and not do music in college? Was it kind of this aha moment, or was it just like, yeah, tell me about what that decision was like?
It was kind of strange. I just didn't get into the ensemble that I wanted to be in, that I had been in. And I took it really hard. And it kind of helped me reflect that I was just really unhappy that this had become about like getting into an ensemble, not anything else. But I think it was cumulative. Like I had a really hard time in this particular ensemble, the jazz ensemble at Central. A lot of the focus was on just kind of ripping people down and thinking that that was going to create excellence. And I didn't see that happening. I didn't see that connection. And it was really a hard environment for me to be in. I tend to thrive in places that really encourage me to come out of my shell. So
Yeah, definitely. It is really interesting, just dipping my toe in the jazz world and playing a little bit myself. There does feel like that's kind of like a little bit of that energy in that culture that is not. It's not the main driver of the genre, of course, but there is like a subculture of this, like really machismo kind of vibe of just needing to just shed your way through, or just, blow your horn to the maximum capability or whatever, like have the ultimate shred fest, whatever it might be. That just feels like you're kind of like, okay, like I remember I'd go to jam sessions and be like, okay, like I have to just show people that I can play the piano, like just show people that I can like hold my own and it's going to be okay. And I don't know how much of that is projected and how much of that is reality. And I think a lot of the time it's a combination, because like you tap into what you're looking for, right? So, I mean, I can look for what I'm trying to find, obviously. But I think it's interesting that you mentioned that was a vibe for you in college. And I feel like that is a vibe that I notice myself in all genres, to be honest. But it's also, sometimes I have a hard time differentiating if that is a projection or if that's reality or a combination of both, But regardless, I do think it is a very relatable experience for most people.
yeah, there is a history in jazz of, Black jazz musicians wanting to, like in the bebop world specifically, wanting to create a music that was so hard that white folks couldn't steal it, essentially. In that context, has this function that's really important. Then just fast forward to years later, even understanding that beginning, that environment of like the cutting contest can be like a really healthy environment for some people. It's not healthy for me specifically, and it does limit certain people's ability to participate in such an amazing art form. So it's like a complicated web of stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot
Yeah.
going on there for sure.
Yeah.
And I think it's good that you give a little back history too, because I think a lot of the time what jam sessions are today are very, very different than what they were when the music was coming into our culture via Black American folks. So
Yeah.
I feel like it's important to come to the music with a lot of reverence, especially as a white person myself, it's like, but I think, thank you for giving the layers of complexity. So this is a musician's wellness podcast, and that means that I'm really trying to focus on topics that might be helpful for artists to hear about, because I think we need to share more of those kinds of conversations. I'm just curious, have you ever been injured yourself as a musician? And in what capacity? If so, if not, no worries.
Yeah, I have been injured twice, like fairly significantly, where it took, in both cases, 2 years to recover. The first time was in 2014. I was diagnosed with thoracic outlet syndrome, which is a lot of people who are hypermobile and who use their upper body heavily end up with this diagnosis. It's not just musicians, also could be like rock climbers or swimmers. And it's a nervous system injury where the nerves that run from your neck down to your fingers get crushed in between your collarbone and your first rib. And that creates all kinds of pain. It can happen in one arm or both. In my case, it happened in both. And it happens because over time, if you're not strengthening certain muscle groups and you're hypermobile, your shoulders just depress further and further until there's an issue and strain put on your nerves. The first thing that happened was I just felt like a sharp pain down one arm. And then that turned into like a lot of pain and a lot of like guarding and locking in my upper body. So I found a PT eventually who was like, I know what this is. I know how to help you. So I worked with her. I worked with a massage therapist, and I also worked with a chronic pain psychotherapist, because your brain starts to change if you experience chronic pain. And so I started to associate playing piano with this pain. And then it was really difficult for me, even after I was healed, to go back and play the instrument. It actually took me moving to New York to like break that magic spell.
Wow.
And I just did a lot less also. I just had to scale back my life, as you have to do when you're injured. And I learned that I'm hypermobile. So I learned that my physical therapist was like, you have to weight train for the rest of your life or you're going to have problems, which was great advice to get, in my mid-20s. I get massage once a month. I always have a physical therapist who I know I can go and see if things come up. And I also started meditating during this time, just as a way to sometimes there's just nothing you can do. You're just waiting to heal, and you need some sort of release and way to process the fact that you can't actually do anything right now. So yeah, that. And then I had another injury in 2020 that was a little more nuanced. It also took 2 years to fully recover from, and it coincided with COVID, which was really intense. It coincided with figuring out that I'm autistic, with extreme stress at my current job, and with some really serious relationship failures. So it was like a lot of things happening at once. What it looked like in my body was I couldn't walk for a number of months. I had autoimmune and nervous system issues. I also had a really high level of fear of other people, so much so that I would have panic attacks just leaving the house. I was just so afraid of other people because I'd had these breaches in trust at my job and with personal relationships. And so I found a physical therapist in New York. And the other kind of main thing that I did that was different was I actually just cut everyone out of my life except for Ivan. I needed to learn how to hear my own voice. This is pretty typical of being autistic and finding out later in life that you're autistic. You realize that you've been doing what we call masking, which is basically changing parts of yourself so that other people don't feel uncomfortable. And it's really damaging for autistic folks' health. And so I just needed to and what happens in that process is you kind of lose yourself. If you're always acting like this other person, at some point you start to believe that you are that person. You start to lose touch with who you really are. So I had to kind of learn how to hear my voice again. And to do that, I had to cut people out of my life and kind of slowly let them back in. So.
Wow, that's huge. Tell me about how you came to discover that you were autistic, and how, I guess, how did that impact your physical body? Just tell me about that discovery, I guess, because I haven't talked to anyone who finds out that they're autistic later on in life. And I'm really curious what that process was like.
Yeah, a friend of mine, close friend of mine, got diagnosed. And she and I were talking about her diagnosis and her working with her therapist. And it just started to sound a lot like me. Like everything she was saying sounded like what I was experiencing. And you start to kind of put the pieces together. I mean, it was a total world shift. And it took a very long time. It took a lot of learning about autism. I mean, I've spent hours and hours watching videos and reading books and meeting other autistic people and talking to autistic people. And so it took a lot of research and just in-depth study. And there was also a period of time where I did feel, like I said, kind of unavailable to myself. Like I felt that some of my relationships were not what they seemed to be, that I wasn't actually acting like the person that I am under that masking surface. And there was a lot of time that I just felt like I wasn't sure who I was. I wasn't sure where to turn. And I was just kind of waiting for something to show its face. A lot of it felt like I was just kind of hitting my head against a wall. I think figuring out that I was autistic and learning about it more. As I started to do that, I started to look at these relationships differently, specifically my relationship with my parents, with some of my friends, people who I had considered friends. I just started like looking through my past and seeing it differently. And I realized that I didn't feel safe to be myself in like a majority of my relationships, and that I either needed to get rid of those relationships in some cases, or I needed to address that in some way.
Yeah, definitely. And what does it look like in your personal experience to be autistic? What does that feel like? What is
Yeah,
that experience?
it feels like being different. It is a neurological difference. So, and that has many different ways of presenting itself. So autistic people have sensory differences. We don't experience this thing that neurotypical folks do, which is called synaptic pruning. Basically, when a neurotypical person walks into, let's say, a crowded restaurant, their mind automatically filters out certain stimuli in favor of others. So they're not actually taking in every single piece of stimuli. For an autistic person, our brains don't do that. So we're actually taking in all of the light, all of the sound, all of the social kind of emotional things that are around. We have more connections in our brain in certain areas, and others they're underconnected in other areas of our brain. But basically, these sensory differences help us to experience the world in a really different way. And because the world is set up for neurotypical people, that can be really difficult in our day-to-day life. You know, if the lights are brighter and the sounds are louder, then that means that's zapping our energy more. So we have less energy to give to other tasks. And that's just kind of one area of what it means to be autistic. But yeah, it's kind of like being a part of a different culture. You have different norms, different tendencies, different ways of communicating. The things you say mean different things to you than they will to a neurotypical person. So there's just kind of a lack of understanding for that culture a lot of the time.
Definitely. How has this whole discovery affected your musicianship, and like has it changed how you write, how you play, how you perform, or has it just kind of added this whole other layer of complexity that has already been there?
Yeah, it's meant that I just don't play as much. I don't do as many things musically. And I was really resistant to that for a while. It's hard to realize that you might not get to do quite as many things just because you need more time to recover. But ultimately, I think it's been really great to just embrace the kinds of limitations that I have. And it's also forced me to really prioritize what I want to be doing, who I want to be doing it with, and kind of get rid of the stuff that's less than. So yeah, just being a little more intentional about what I do, doing far less. And it's ultimately helped me get clear on things, which is cool.
I think that would be helpful for the majority of folks, right?
Yeah.
It's like focusing on what really brings you the most joy and richness in your life and filtering out the rest. But yeah, I can see how that would definitely require you to get that much more intentional about what you say yes to, for sure. But I think that that could be pretty global, right, for all of us.
Yeah.
I know that's true for
That's
me.
true.
And I know that you said that you had to take like these long periods of time off music entirely, where you weren't playing and you were doing all this rehab. And that was when you started doing interdisciplinary work, right? And basically did all kinds of different things that have evolved into care pedagogy and relationship research and development. So, can you just jump in and tell me about what all of that means and how that looks?
Absolutely. Yeah, I started when I had thoracic outlet syndrome, the injury I had in Seattle. At the time, I was playing with my own band, which was called Honey Noble, and I was playing piano and singing. And when I got injured, I couldn't do that anymore. I also primarily wrote music using the piano. And so writing music was also difficult. And I just like needed an outlet. I needed some sort of creative outlet. And I actually don't know how I thought to consider theater or dance. I think I was just thinking like, if I could just use my body, then that would be great. Like I'd probably get a benefit physically from doing that. And I'd also get to make art. I knew a friend of ours, his name is Gavin Reeb. He's a theater director. And I knew that he was interested in doing theater projects with musicians. I even had done some pieces with him. And so I got in touch with him. And then we've kind of formed this little team of himself as the director, me as the music director, Swillman Aaron Bednars as our dramaturg, and Allison Burke as our choreographer. And the seeds of relationship R&D and care pedagogy started with that group. We met for 6 months prior to making any piece of art at all. And all we did was get to know each other by hanging out at each other's houses, making dinner. And each week we brought in something that was inspiring us and shared it. And we just did that for 6 months. And I had never had a process like that. Like as a musician, I was used to it. We just show up, maybe one rehearsal, and then that's it. We're definitely not talking about like why we're doing things or what we're interested in. And I really liked that process a lot. It was maybe the best part of making things with them, period. Making the pieces was just kind of like the aftermath of this great thing we got to do. And I learned from them, Gavin, Aaron, and Allison, they come from theater and dance traditions where they have much longer periods of time where they have to make a piece. They need to take the time as actors to get to know each other, to feel comfortable with each other physically and emotionally. For dancers, just like body connection to each other, time spent with each other, all these things are really valued. So I think just this idea that part of everything we do is relating to each other, is getting to know each other. That is true in the arts. It's also true in the places that we work. So relationship R&D and care pedagogy are really just about like being a little bit more intentional and systematic about how we relate to each other, thinking of those things the same way we think about other projects. Like we practice our instruments every day, but we can also practice parts of our relationships. We can create systems to make sure that everyone's being taken care of.
Yeah. How do you implement that in your daily life? Is it a specific practice that you do like independent of daily life, then come back? How do you incorporate this practice?
Yeah, mostly I've done this in group settings. There is also a piece of it that's like just kind of personal, like getting to know yourself. So relationship R&D is kind of the broader idea that we should approach our relationships in the same way we approach other complex tasks, research, personal practice, creating tools and systems. So I definitely approach my marriage that way with Ivan, my friendships that way. But then kind of in a bigger picture sense, I have done these practices with groups of artists in workshops, in performances for audience members. We did this immersive party, which was a workshop for artists that was supposed to help this little theater group, which is called Cheat Day, help us create content for like our next work. But simultaneously, we wanted to take care of our participants, give them rest, give them ways to have fun. And so we created like a series of exercises. We had a field day for adults. We also had moments where we got together one-on-one and asked each other specific questions. We made a walking tour of the space we were using together. Each person made a part of it independently, and then we came together and listened to it. And we spent the whole day together doing like all of these pre-planned activities. And then in music performances, I've done a performance where I had nap stations, drawing stations, and water stations for audience members to take breaks at. I also have done this kind of in pieces that I've made where the band that I'm working with actually takes care of one of the musicians after they do something really challenging in the performance.
That's
In this case,
awesome.
yeah, we watched a nature documentary, and the person was brought like snacks and stuffed animals and comforting things. And the audience just gets to watch this. So it's also part of the performance, but it's also a way to like take a break and and have a nice time.
Totally. I love that. I wish that that could be a part of every performance where it's like you need something or you feel something difficult or challenging, and then you have a whole community of people support you when that feeling arises, right?
Yeah.
I think that might be helpful for many musicians to practice, even if it wasn't primarily how they perform, just so that they could recall what that feeling was like when they're performing on stage. And I think it just helps so much to practice the narrative that the audience is for us and supporting us and on the journey with us, and that music can be this form of like caring for one another rather than this performance that we are then meant to wow people and just blow them out of the water with how amazing we are. It's just every time without fail. So I think that's just a really cool practice, and I want to try to figure out how to incorporate that into my own performing and in like the recitals that I have my students do, because there's so much fear around performing. And I have specifically, I mean, I've personally struggled with a lot of performance anxiety, and I know I've talked about it in previous episodes, but I always want to hear about other people's experiences with that if they have, and hear about some ways that you work through it if you have struggled with it. Can you speak to that, or maybe that's not a part of your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I also just want to say that I love what you said about like the audience being for you as a performer. I think that's like sometimes not acknowledged in the music world as much as it is in like film and theater, where the audience is really seen as like a important participant in the whole thing and someone who's like they're really rooting for the performance to be great. And yeah, I was thinking about performance anxiety, and I always think of myself like when it comes to physical risks, like jump off this bridge into water, I'm like, absolutely not. Like, I'm not a physical risk taker. I wish I was. I think it's so cool. But I am like an emotional risk taker. I feel comfortable taking risks on stage since I was young, which that's great. That helps me a lot. Doesn't mean I don't get nervous or I obviously have had moments that have been really hard on stage. And then another kind of strange feature of me is that I feel more at home on stage. I feel like that's less of a performance in some ways for me than the performance of everyday life that is being autistic and masking. So the stage has always felt like a place where I get to expand and be more myself. Like the stage is a place where just more is permissible. I can say stuff on stage that I can't say in real life. So it has felt like a safer place for me overall, which is kind of a strange feature of, I guess, being autistic and a performer.
I love that. That's great.
I have this one memory of failing spectacularly at an audition to be a part of this theater show. I did this like solo performance. I auditioned in front of two people I didn't know and then two friends of mine who were actually in the audience. And I didn't have time to put anything together. I was doing this other thing that was really more important to me. And I just really did not prepare. And I just went up there and like bombed hard. Like it was spectacular. And I felt really like to the point where one of the judges was like angry that I had performed like, really intense kind of, I mean, also my question is, why are you angry? I didn't do anything crazy, I just kind of made some mediocre art. It was okay. But yeah, I definitely felt like it was not my best. I felt really embarrassed. And thankfully I had these two friends who saw the performance, and they actually, one of them was Allison, the choreographer I work with, and a good friend of mine. And they both came up to me and they just said, that was so special to be a part of. And I was just like, I mean, that response just kind of blew my mind. And I felt so ashamed. I felt so embarrassed. And I said to Allison, I think, I'm so embarrassed that you had to see that. Like, I think you're going to think less of me. And Allison just said, like, we are so far past that. Like, that's never going to happen. So I think having their support was really amazing, but it was also just like a really rich experience for me. That was also very negative and about failure. I learned as much from that experience as when I've had performances go extremely well. And so I kind of realized like the end result, it's not so important. It's more about this process that I'm going through and all the kinds of things that I'm experiencing and learning. I shouldn't be so selective with like, I had a great time. It was perfect. Like there's a whole spectrum of things to experience on this stage. And I don't want to lose out on these really rich, more negatively toned experiences just because I'm looking for that perfect performance and wonderful feeling.
That's a really great point, to embrace the spectrum of experience that being on stage can be, and that we're not just searching for that carrot that gives us the okay that we are in fact doing the like something impressive by showing up and making this performance look easy. That's really not, at least at my core, what performing needs to be in order for me to feel like myself on stage. But unlearning that has been like the crucible of my life. And I still have that cognitive dissonance of feeling like I need to present the absolute best that I can, or it's a memory that will forever be logged as negative, as informing a part of me that I'm ashamed of, you know, that I shouldn't be proud of. And I love this idea of embracing all of the experiences as deeply and being like curious and open to whatever that experience is on stage, even if it isn't what you expected at the time. The other thing that you said too that is so cool is that when you're on stage, you allow yourself to take more risks. And that is definitely the opposite for me. I feel a lot more fear when I am on stage. And I think it is related to this idea that I never really thought about performing as like a risk, but I guess that is really what it is. And when you take risks, that necessitates that you don't get to curate an outcome, right? That's like what a risk is not projecting and knowing what's going to happen, but trusting that the risk was worth taking regardless of what happens, right? I think that's why people do take risks, is because no matter what, it's better to know what's going to happen on the other side than to not do it at all. And I love this idea that, you know, we can show up and embrace whatever happens on stage as an equal experience rather than just going for one type of experience again and again. So I love that. And I think that's something I'm definitely going to try to incorporate into my own performing. And as I talk to my students as well, you know, we all are striving to be the best that we can be, but that includes what we consider failures, right? So, and our less impressive experiences that are really special for people to be a witness to, right? So I love all of that. Thank you for saying that. And I think that might kind of piggyback off of this concept of, I think that performance anxiety can be rooted in a really harsh inner critic, or, you know, voices that are negative, that can be somewhat resounding, or voices of comparison, what have you. Have you had any struggles with the inner critic as you've dealt with some of these other kind of challenges, or can you speak to that at all in terms of how you deal with the mosaic of performing and existing?
Totally. Yeah, I think I often feel like I have to prove myself to others. I think that's common, not just in the arts, but in a lot of fields. I'm starting to be able to let go of that more and more, which is nice. But it's especially hard when you're in a totally new environment, when you don't have like a community around you that's already like, you're Katie and we like you. So when I moved to New York, I definitely felt that pressure to like prove myself. And I tend to before maybe this year, I tended to just be excited to make things. And I like just made stuff and I was like, it's fun to make stuff. Here it is. And then I had a lot of interaction with people, you know, seeing my art, having their reactions, and kind of learned through that how much of a risk it actually is to like put yourself out there and then get people's feedback all the time. Like it's really intense actually. And at the time I didn't have a lot of like inner confidence, and so that would feel very like a lot more real. Like their depictions of me were a lot more real than what I felt like I was doing, or even my closest friends who were telling me what they thought. So I think one of the things I keep in mind is that not all opinions are created equal. That a lot of times someone hears your performance, they come up to you, they say, you sound like this person. And the reason they say that is because they were just listening to that person in the car. You know, it's like, and maybe that's not something you need to take in. But if you have people in your life who you know really get you, get your thing, who can be honest with you about the things that they might need to critique in some way, that's a great piece of advice to take in, or their praise, their criticism. Like those are things you can feel comfortable taking in, I think. And then also it really matters what you think of what you're making too. Like you're the one who's kind of has this vision and other people might not understand until you show it to them. So just kind of like having confidence and trusting yourself to see this thing through. Even though my experience had mostly been like, I'm just making stuff and then being a little naive, and people are giving me criticism or praise. I did recently, after like a long hiatus of not writing music for a while, I started writing again for this record that I'm working on with my friend Michael. And I just hated everything I was writing. Like I really did not, I don't know what was going on really. I feel like maybe I wanted my music to sound a certain way and then it was sounding a different way. And that was like a very strange experience for me. I was like, I'm making this music. I should be able to make it sound like what I want, right? But I think there is kind of a lack of control in writing, which I hadn't really realized before this year. But at this point, I've done this for a while now. And so I just felt like you just have to keep going, was what I kept telling myself. Like, just put in the work. Don't worry about hating it or liking it. Just like keep going and we'll see. We'll see. Tomorrow, maybe you'll feel differently. Then I started to really like ping pong back and forth. Like one day I loved this song, the next day I hated it. So like something weird was going on in my perception of what I was writing. And now I'm just kind of committed to, I want to make this music. I want to make a record. I'm not in control of the result, really. I'm just kind of following these songs and seeing where they lead. And so I don't have to worry. And it might not be exactly what I want it to be. It'll definitely be worth listening to,
Yeah.
But if it's not the, total perfection that I would love to create, maybe that'll come in the next record. Maybe it'll come 5 records from now. Maybe it'll never come, but the process is worth it all the same.
Definitely. To your point of not all opinions are created equal, I think that that's such a great reminder to also just be grounded in holding the opinion that you have of yourself in the highest regard. And that is really challenging if, say, you don't have the strongest foundation on self-love and acceptance. And I think that it's good to just start investing there first before seeking external approval. I have definitely fallen victim to doing like the reverse and having this upside down triangle of being like, I'm going to do this thing and it's so pure and beautiful and you love it. But I think through the process of like loving this beautiful, pure little creation that I've made, I forget that sharing that with the world requires that you love it no matter what other people have to say about it. And I think I've fallen victim to having these little gifts, these things that I love that I think everybody else will love. And then when somebody doesn't love them, all of a sudden, all of my value is completely out the window, regardless of whether I know them or not. It doesn't even matter. It's like, oh, somebody said something about this thing that I made when right. It's amazing. And I just do notice how quickly, and again, like I know that not many people necessarily struggle to the degree that I have, but I know a lot of people that do, and I think it fuels this sort of like egoism or this like other kind of like musicianship where we do have to prove ourselves to others in order to sustain value for ourselves. And regardless of the degree to which we suffer from that, I think it's important to recognize that like you got to have your own back first. And even if like that critic's like, I don't even like this, it's like, well, maybe you think you don't like it, but or maybe this is just a projection of what you think other people will say. In any event, just create the thing and then let it go, because it obviously wanted to be manifested through you. So lots of good content there to toy with, because a lot of these conversations I feel like are thought experiments on how to get away from the mire that we don't even choose to put on ourselves, and to then decipher what is truly ours. How do we claim what is authentic to us as artists, which is going to look different for every single person. So that's really great. Is there any nugget of wisdom that you could offer to a musician or artist that is actively trying to find or embrace their musical voice, their authentic musical voice?
Yeah, finding your authentic voice, just like as a person, is actually a part of finding your musical voice as an artist, as a musician. So getting to know yourself like as an active practice, not as something that's just kind of passive, but doing certain activities like journaling about your childhood, or meditating to find out like what your mind's doing, or, you know, like actively trying to figure out what your needs are, what your communication style is, maybe what your neurotype is, you know, I think all of those things are part of getting to know yourself. And I also think building your confidence in yourself is a key part of finding your voice. And that can look a lot of different ways. I think for me, it's actually looked like testing my physical limits. So I really like weightlifting. I really like testing my body. And I've found that in that controlled environment where I get to do something that's a little bit scary and then overcome that fear, that creeps into other parts of my life. And I feel more confident. I feel like I can handle taking risks or the stress that pressure brings. So I think there's a lot of like avant-garde ways to build confidence in yourself. But then I think specifically to like how you find your authentic musical voice on your instrument, I think I heard this from another musician, but finding your voice is kind of about choosing what's most important to you in terms of singing. If it's just like laser beam pitch, that's going to be part of your voice. You know, that's not going to allow you to be Tom Waits. You're going to have like a Dolly Parton vibe maybe instead. So like the kinds of choices that you're making about what matters to you, those types of choices are what your voice will become.
That's great. That's great. Thank you for that. I also like that you tied it back to the voice, because I think that finding and developing a relationship that's loving with your singing voice is a very vulnerable journey to take. And there are so many different projections on what a voice should sound like. And then kind of stripping all that away and asking yourself, like, where is my value? What do I want to cultivate in my own voice, and seeking that, and then letting it, it's okay. It's, you know what, if my goal is emotion and like raw, gritty vibes, then maybe pitchiness is not, I mean, obviously, let's try to be the best version we can be of ourselves and try to sing on pitch. Yes. But that doesn't have to be the defining factor of how I feel about my voice. If my value lies in like guttural emotion, you know, or vice versa, you know, if being on pitch is a value, right? Having a big voice, whatever, soft voice, raspy voice, it doesn't really matter. But I think just like double down on supporting that decision within yourself and let the rest go. I love that. I love that. And you chose to share this deeply introspective original piece, Diagnosis, that listeners will get to hear in its entirety at the end of our conversation. Tell me about this piece. What was the inspiration behind it? Has it evolved since its conception?
Yeah, it was written for a song a day challenge that I did with a couple friends during the pandemic. It's short and it's created some interesting song structures because they are so short and I barely repeat anything at all. It was kind of a character study. I was trying to think about if I was told that I only had X days to live, what might go through my mind? How might I feel? What might I do? And so it's just me like working through this character study. Initially, the song, when I just kind of put it together in Logic myself, had this really strong like arpeggiator that was just like the focal point of the piece. It sounded really nice, but it was the first thing that when I went in to work with Michael Coleman, who's also an engineer and the one who's engineering my record, we just threw it out. We were like, we need to get rid of that because we're looking for new stuff. We've kind of just been stripping down these songs to like their bare component parts. And Michael's idea is basically like, what's our first idea for the song? Let's throw that out. And then let's do the second idea just to kind of get like the gut reaction, like what we're used to doing in musical context, but trying to find something new, something different, something that surprises us and seeing where that leads us. Sometimes it leads to amazing things, sometimes it's a real failure, but at least we're getting outside of what we're used to. And then the other thing that Michael and I have been talking a lot about is moving away from a traditional band that plays music, especially in a recorded setting, and thinking more about what are different sounds that we can use as a foundation for this piece. Let's do away with our understanding of what a traditional band is, and let's create our own band using the things that come up to us as we work on this. So we kind of stripped it down. We added a ton of ideas to this stripped down version. That was our second draft. And then this is our third draft where we kind of cut out a lot of that noise. And what we learned in that third draft was silence is actually very nice. we were thinking that we would scoop all these things out. There would be all these holes that we would need to fill with other things. But what we found was that spaciousness seemed to be part of what we were working with.
What instrumentation did you end up landing on for this piece? Like, did you go?
We started with this like muted piano sound. That's very like lots of overtones, like real crazy. We added a synthesizer that kind of extended the sound a bit. We also added drum machine. And then I did a few different takes of there's like a main vocal line, but then there are additional vocal parts. Don't know what I'm thinking. They'll manicure my head. We chose different pedals to run my voice through. And then I just improvised, like made up stuff. And we kind of like decided what we liked, kept that.
That's cool. Just so listeners can kind of piece together what they're hearing. So last little tidbit here before we wrap up. What's your why in music? Like, why do this?
I think fundamentally it's like the explorer vibe, like the question, what happens if I do this? And then finding out. And then beyond that, I think getting to be myself, getting to know myself. It's always been a place where I felt like I could be more myself, not just like on stage, but also musical communities tend to feel at home in those places. And I also think it just brings more life to life.
I love that. Music brings life to life. I'm going to use that. That is
so good.
Oh, it's so good. So how can people best get in touch with you, Katie?
I avoid social media like the plague. So sorry. The best way to reach me is probably just my email address, which I have a very personal, approach to life. So I definitely would not mind receiving an email. My email is katieannjacobson@gmail.com. You can email me anytime and I'll say hi and we'll become pen pals and it'll be nice. I do post on social media when I have shows right now. Mm-hmm. And if you email me, eventually that's going to turn into like a little postcard delivery service where I send people postcards about when I'm playing. So
love that.
You can also sign up for that.
Love that. That's great. Well, thank you, Katie, for joining me today on Artistry with Heart and for sharing your wisdom with the world. We hope you'll stay tuned for future episodes like this one. Listeners out there, if you heard something that resonated with you or that you want more of, make sure to subscribe to my channel and download the journal prompt PDF directly related to Katie's episode that you can find in the show notes or at my website, stephaniebernards.org/inspiration. And here you can go deeper with some of these questions that Katie and I talked about with yourself and your personal artistry, because I hope that's why you're here. Well, that's all for now. Until next time, be you and stay inspired. And now the full version of Diagnosis.
Untreatable at best, the scans were showing something ancient. I might have blacked out some. Unbeatable at best. Yama's such a mean bitch. It's serious, I guess. Don't know what I'm thinking. They'll manicure my head. I wanna see my kid.
You gotta get over that.
I wanna go to bed. I think I'll drink instead. I look up at the sky. It never looks so violet.